right, thank you so much, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and to share with you a little bit today. I hope everyone can hear okay. You're good? All right, wonderful. I had to still raise glasses, so it all works out.
One of us will see.
That's right, that's right. Let's get through the sun. There we go. We are up and running, so this is good. All right, so Jesus, he told us in John 14:27, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not be afraid." That is a powerful statement, and just a statement that I've had to ponder a long time, because through circumstances of my own life, I found fear and anxiety, and I wondered, God, I believe what you say is true. I believe the Bible is true, but I don't understand why I can't live in this peace. So I need you to teach this to me. And so he shared and take me through many things, and all that he's taught me, I want to just share with you, so that you too can see some of the truth of how he wants us to live in peace, and how he wants us to walk through the circumstances of our life in peace, and how it's available to us right now. So the goals that we have for today, we want to understand how our emotions work. This is something that we deal with on an everyday basis, so we want to understand how they work. We want to understand how fear and anxiety and how it operates in us. So we're just going to, the first part is really going to be teaching, just kind of to make sure we're all on the same page. We're all at different understandings, we're all different stages in our life, so we're just going to do some foundational work. So some of it might not be new, but we just want to lay a foundation so that we're all at the same place in understanding. And then we can look at what God has told us, how we can reclaim our peace, and how we can continue to walk in this place of peace. And what we can do with this fear and anxiety. It comes, right? We experience fear, we experience anxiety, so we're going to just find out what God has to say about that. I want to just make some preliminary statements up front. We have all been praying for breakthrough. I'm expecting breakthrough. God is a God of miracles. He can, just touch our hearts and heal us, and in an instant, He can change how we're experiencing what we're experiencing. And I'm expecting that for today. But also, it's important to remember that our Christian walk is a journey, and sometimes it's a process, and we just need to have patience with that process. And God has His plan. God knows the best way to teach us, the best way to grow us. So sometimes there's a moment of breakthrough, and sometimes it's a slowly unfolding process. So both are good, and just important to remember that. Also, I just wanted to mention, just on the upfront again, some mental health problems are due to chemical imbalances, and so it's just, and they need, or it might be a result of a trauma that they've experienced that they haven't had proper healing in their hearts for. So it's just important to, and they might require physicians or medical treatment or whatever. So in no way is this event meant to discourage anyone from taking any medications or discontinuing medications without their physician's consent. Okay, so if you experience a breakthrough, and but again, we don't want to discourage you from working with your physicians. Okay, just wanted to get that on the upfront. So we're all at different stages in our faith journey, as I mentioned earlier. Our role as the body of Christ is to encourage one another daily, and to help carry one another's burdens. So we're not to judge. We're here, as we mentioned earlier, it's a safe place. And instead, today is about honoring one another and helping one another exactly where they're at, and help them take steps forward to stand up in confidence, to take however big or however little step that they might take today. It's just about encouraging one another to move closer to God. That's what all of this is about, because He's the one that can ultimately do the healing in our hearts. So as I mentioned earlier, all of this came from my own journey with God. Fear is something that and anxiety is something I've had to wrestle with a lot in my past. I never learned how to express what was going on inside. I always stuffed everything down. I never learned how to deal with the anxieties. Life happens, and you experience things. And so I I reached a point a couple of years ago and I experienced an emotional breakdown. I had come to a critical mass point, and just kind of something broke inside, and I was paralyzed. I was empty. I was on empty. There was nothing. There was no juice getting me going, and I was just paralyzed with fear because of the circumstances I was experiencing. And I really had to turn to God and say, God, I need help. I'm a doer by nature. I like to keep busy. I like to accomplish. I have my to-do list. I like to check them off. But in this, I recognized I could not do anything to free myself. I needed God to help me. I needed Him to untie the knots that I had found myself in. So this is the result of God doing that and helping me to step out of the fear that I was in bondage to. All right, so the components of fear. There is a workbook for you, and if you want to follow along, there are some blanks that you can fill in. I have all the blanks up there, so in case you've missed one, they'll be up on the screen for you, and you can just kind of follow along. Some people like to do that. So first, we kind of just want to take a quick look at what the components of our emotions are. There's three different components. There's arousal, which is the energy that powers our emotions. So it can be high or it can be low, and it makes us aware. It calls for our attention in the moment. Something happens inside of us, this emotion happened, and it's like, hey, you need to pay attention to that, or you need to do something about that. And so this arousal gets our attention. With so many other things that are happening, it calls for our attention. With that emotion comes a motivation. So the emotion sends an action signal to the muscles and organs of our body to prepare for us to do something. It moves us to action. So that's the second part. And there's different kinds of motivations that come from your emotions. So compassion, you're moved to sympathize with someone, to walk with someone beside them. So your compassion motivates you to help someone or to be close to someone. Enjoyment motivates you to appreciate something or to relax. Shame can motivate us to hide or to cover up. There are survival motivations such as fear, and so that flight or fight reflex that we have. So so there's those motivations that come with our emotions. It motivates us to action. So that's really what our emotions are doing. It's telling our body that we need to do something to respond to our environments. And it's a guide, really. It helps us to be aware of what's happening and to know if we need to do something. And the feelings, that's the third part, and that's a subjective experience of the emotions. It's what they feel like. And they dominate our conceptions of what's happening around us. So that's the three pieces of our emotions. And some of the physical symptoms of fear and anxiety, there's panic or uneasiness, sleep problems, and tell me if anyone, I'm sure all of you have experienced some of these here. Not being able to stay calm, shortness of breath, your heart can get racing, you can have a dry mouth, you can feel nauseous. There's a whole huge list of different, your muscles can get tensed up, or you can feel dizzy. Yeah.
Does anybody own a dark green Fiat?
Oh, that's mine.
Your trunk is open?
Oh, that's, I can't, if I close it, I can't get it open again, so it's on purpose.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so that's just some of the physical symptoms, and I think we have all experienced some of those symptoms. That's really what this is all about, and that uncomfortable, that the result of the anxiety. So there's different types of fear. Is all fear bad? Well, let's have a little look at that. So there's a rational fear, and that's is understanding the consequences of certain actions and therefore avoiding negative ones. So that fight or flight, a bear, you're walking down the path, you see a bear, whoa, you feel that fear, you're like, okay, I'm going to get out of here. that is a good response. It's not a bad thing. And it motivates us to the proper action, and it's a good thing. So there's rational fear, and it's a survival or a preservation. It's something God has given us to help us navigate so that we can navigate safely. And it's based on the current circumstance or the reality of what you're in right at the moment. So this kind of fear does not need to be taught. If you clap your hands very loudly with a baby, they're going to startle. You don't have to teach anyone this basic rational fear. It's God-given, it's for a good purpose. There's also irrational fear. So that's a fear of something that may or may not happen. It often has little possibility. This is rooted where our anxieties lie. It's based on a perceived thought that are often rooted in past experiences. So, for me, growing up in a family that didn't know how to communicate with one another, silence was a punishment. The cold shoulder was the way to express that you weren't pleased with someone. So that's just how I learned that I was being punished with silence. Well, now in adulthood life, with people that don't operate in that way, sometimes silence, I'm like, are they mad at me? It's like, no, they're busy. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of, to me, I still sometimes feel that trigger of panic. I'm like, they don't like me anymore. But it's not. It's just that was me. And so I have that little irrational fear still sometimes. And it's not based on reality. It's just based on just an inner wound from my past, right? And it can often express itself in terms of hopeless despair and can be self-incriminating. You can incriminate yourself with your anxieties. So there's also, within this irrational fear, it can be pathological. And that is when it becomes like a sickness to our well-being. Like when we're pathologically affected by anxiety, it's a sickness that's affecting our everyday life. So it can be acute. That's the first one. And it has to do with states determined by situations of extraordinary danger. It's sharp and severe. So, such as when the earth begins to shake. You're going to be afraid. That is a normal, you can have a rational fear of this earthquake situation. You're going to, what do I do? You need to be paying attention and dealing with the situation. But if you have an acute fear, then you're going to be paralyzed in fear. You're not going to be able to respond. It's going to be so severe that it has this fear response is not helping you. It's actually hindering you because it's so severe. So that's an acute irrational fear. And then there's also chronic. And it's to be constantly in a state of preoccupation, to be constantly or habitually in this state of irrational fear. And it becomes a part of our being, right? When it's chronic. And we end up developing attachments to it, such as phobias and the like. So that is, we're going to be focusing on the irrational fear. I think we can safely assume we want to have the rational fear because it's, God's given survival mechanism. But we want to look at that irrational fear because that is the one that keeps us in bondage, right? There's also a third fear, and this really is just the limitations of the English language, right? The third one is the fear of God. Throughout the Bible, it talks about the fear of God, and I know for myself there were times, especially in the beginning of my faith journey, I was like, well, I don't get this. Because I certainly started out thinking that God was up in the sky with a lightning bolt ready to zap me should I make a mistake, and that's what I thought the fear of God was. But actually the fear of God is born from the knowledge of who God is. It's that sense of awe we feel when we encounter a great spectacle of nature. I don't know if anyone here, have you been to Niagara Falls? Anyone been to? Amazing. I was blessed. My husband and I, we went on a boat ride and I went down into the Niagara Falls. Because Niagara Falls is a horseshoe and this boat drives straight into the center of it. And we thought that'd be exciting, so we did that. And we drove into it, and I remember I was shaking because I could feel the power of this mighty waterfall, and I was like, I wonder if this is what it's like to, experience God, right? Like, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was overwhelmed by the power and by the magnificence that I was experiencing, right? And that I've made a relation to the fear of God. It's this awe state of God's amazingness, of his might. It's feeling small before something that's immense. It's the stupor or marvel mixed with adoration and praise. This is what fear of God is. And in Psalm 33:12, it's something we're told that needs to be taught. This is not the rational fear. You're born with it as a survival mechanism. The fear of God is something we need to be taught. And Proverbs 9 and 10 tells us that this fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, because it leads us to making right choices. So this is also a good fear. So we've looked at the different types of fear, and we're not going to look at the rational or the fear of God. We're going to look at the irrational today. All right. Okay. So I just very quickly, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, just want to quickly run through the nature of God, the nature of Satan, the human nature, because understanding that can really help us to lay a nice backdrop on what we're going to talk about later. So Ephesians 6 and 12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This is a foundational truth when we're dealing with our fear and anxieties. Our battle is not with flesh and blood. It's not with people, although it's often our trials are coming through people. Our true battle is with the powers and principalities. It's with the spiritual forces of evil. So understanding that, let's look at the different natures here. So God is all-powerful. There's a comparison there. God is all-powerful. Satan is a created being. In God tells the truth and does not lie. In John 8:44 it says, you belong to the father, your devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So, very important to remember, God tells the truth and does not lie. Satan is all about lies. So, we're going to talk about lies as we're going through this workshop. And understanding that helps us to understand where they're coming from, where these lies are coming from. God has a plan to bless us. He created us for a purpose. He has a plan to bless us, to do good for us. In 1 Peter 5 and 8, it says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. Satan, on the other hand, has a plan to destroy us. And a lot of these circumstances that are happening to us, these fears and anxieties, is Satan's attempt to destroy us, to pull us...
Oh dear.
It's Satan's attempt to pull us out of that place of peace, to pull us out of that place of God's love and mercy. All right, and God does not tempt. James 1:13, when tempted, no one should say God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. So God does not tempt us in all our difficult circumstances. Satan, on the other hand, looks for opportunities to tempt us. Luke 4:13, when the devil had finished all his tempting, he left Jesus until an opportune time. So he's looking to tempt us. God will not tempt us. Satan's looking to tempt us. And where does temptations come from? It's part of our human nature, the James 1:14. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Okay, so we need to own that and recognize that we are born in this broken world with a sinful nature. We have selfish motives, and they can lead us astray sometimes. All right, Satan's nature leads to repentance and no regret. 2 Corinthians 7 and 10, godly sorrow brings repentance and leads to salvation and leaves no regret. But worldly sorrow brings death. So that kind of shows the difference between God's conviction versus Satan's condemnation. So those two are important to understand. God desires relationship with us, Satan hates us. 1 Peter 5:8. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. So I want to have an accurate picture of what Satan is and what he's out to do and how he is affecting my life and bringing anxiety and fear. And so it just helps to lay a little foundation to remember God's goodness and Satan's evilness. Okay, so, and as human beings, we're certainly not immune to contributing to our own messes sometimes. We were given free will to choose. We don't always choose the right thing, nor do those around us, and that can contribute to our anxiety and our fear. We're motivated by our own desires. As we grow in grace, we start making, loving choices, but sometimes we haven't grown in that grace. And where is that? Oh yeah, Proverbs 14:12 says, there's a way which seems right to a man, but in the end, is the way of death. I just always found that an interesting one. Sometimes we think we know what we're doing, but actually it's leading us in the wrong direction. All right, so covering those bases, that's good. Where does fear come from? 1 John 4:18, this is a pivotal verse in understanding a little bit more about fear. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. I pondered this verse a lot, and it was actually interesting. I posted it on Facebook because I saw a little pretty picture and it had the verse and I happened to be thinking of it, and I was really surprised because someone put an angry face on it, and I had never gotten an angry face before. I was like, what, it's a beautiful verse, why is someone angry about this? And because I was kind of fixated on the beginning part, and then I read the verse again. It says the one who fears is not made perfect in love, and I was like, oh, well, maybe they felt judgment of some sort by this verse. The encouragement here is that word perfect, I did a little research, it means mature or complete. We're not perfect people, right? We cannot attain perfection in and of ourselves, but God can make us whole and complete and mature and perfect in His love. So we'll set that one aside so we don't get tripped up on that one. I don't want anyone to be upset by that little piece. But the focus here is that fear has to do with punishment. Rhea, I'm just going to ask you to come on up here. All right, so I just want to do a little illustration. So, when we invite Jesus into our heart, He places in us His Spirit, His love, His light in our hearts. But you know what? Satan is actively trying to kill, steal, and destroy us. So he looks for our weak areas, our insecurities, and he looks to increase our fear in the area that keeps us in bondage and to rob us from God's peace. So sin and wounds is like having mud thrown on our soul. A little bit of unforgiveness. You get hurt by someone. It's a difficult thing. We see something we want, so we're filled with some greed. Ooh. He's throwing mud all over the place, not just on Rhea.
Around me.
Someone that we care very, very deeply for abandon us. Get a little bit more mud thrown on us. Someone we have placed great confidence in betrays us. Betrays our integrity, betrays our heart. Throw a little bit more mud on there. What else do we have? Ooh, here's a biggie. Here's a great big biggie. Gossip. Who hasn't had a little bit of mud of gossip thrown right on your heart? And what's it slowly doing? This mud that's being thrown on us? Slander, there's another one. It's slowly covering the light of Christ that's in us. And it's robbing us of being the light to shine to others, and it's weighing us down. We'll just hold on to that for right now. Thank you, Rhea. Very good. All right. So God resides in his fullness in my spirit. I have full access to him. The mud of my soul blocks the light of Christ in me. God is working to clean off the mud of my woundedness as he deals with our wounds and our hurts and remove them so that his light might shine again in our hearts. But Satan's not the only one that is throwing mud at us. We can put mud on ourselves, right? Through our own sins, we can add a little bit more mud on us. Through our self-condemnation, through our own selfishness, and others can certainly throw mud on us through their own sinful actions. So we need to do something with this. All right. So as mud is thrown, it causes pain in our hearts, and it can be a penalty inflicted on others for an offense. For example, if I don't want my family member, if I don't do what my family member wants, then they will be withdraw and be silent, which is also known as emotional blackmail, to force me into doing what they want. So it can start to manipulate you. Or it can simply be a severe handling or treatment because we live in a sinful world and not everyone is operating in love. And we must encounter from one another. And this creates fear and insecurity inside that we carry forward. So sometimes we also receive a natural consequence. For example, the effect or result of something that happened. If I steal a chocolate bar, there's going to be a consequence, a negative consequence that I'm not going to enjoy. I'm going to have to apologize, I'm going to have to make amends to the owner, I'm going to have to do something. And this is unpleasant and will potentially make me think twice about doing it again, so I don't have to experience the same negative consequence. But it should not invoke fear. It's a natural consequence of wrongdoing. This is discipline, which means imposing rules or guidelines on people. It's the ability to behave and work in a controlled manner. It's a way of learning to improve behavior. This actually works to help wipe off some of that mud, so that we're not going to continue throwing mud at ourselves. So we can discipline. Oh, yeah, there we go. We can discipline in fear or in love. So love teaches, it raises up and lifts the person up. It may cause pain, but it ultimately takes the person being disciplined to a higher level of integrity. Kind of like a surgeon. When he cuts us and it hurts us, but it's to help heal the person and have a better functioning life. We can also discipline in fear, which tears down or crushes, and it can create rebellion. So our sinful nature or ignorance causes us to punish rather than to discipline. So just understanding these things help us to understand when we get to the place that why some of these anxieties we're still carrying around. So the more painful the past punishments you have experienced, the more fear you may currently live in if you've not received healing in your heart. Left in a fearful condition, we can perceive something or someone as life-threatening because you anticipate painful punishments to come, to follow a certain set of actions, when in fact there's no threat. Like I was mentioning earlier about the silence, right? From my upbringing, it was a punishment. And so now, in adulthood, in different relationships, I'm still interpreting it that way, although it's not actually that way. And so that's kind of how this past punishment's carried forward. When you look at a dog, okay, let's look at a dog. When you first meet a dog, what's the normal response when you first meet them? Do they go crazy? What's that?
Aww.
Oh, yeah. And how do they respond to you when they meet you the first time? If this is a happy, well-adjusted dog, they're gonna run up to you. Are they gonna lick you? They're gonna smell you, and they're gonna wag their tail, and it's an exciting event, right? You're meeting for the first time, but it's an interaction. There's at least an attempt to trust, at least an attempt to be open. What happens when you meet a dog that's been abused? What's their response to meeting someone new?
They cower or attack.
Yeah, absolutely. And why is it? What are they fearing? Punishment that they have experienced before. They don't know this new person's not going to punish them. That's what they're carrying forward. And you have to be very gentle, right? You have to let them come to you. You have to, there's a very different approach to someone or to a dog that's been abused and not abused. So I keep that in mind because we are all in different states, right? We've all had different experiences. We all have different levels of, if you've experienced a lot of trauma or a lot of abuse or a lot of negative punishments in your life, then you're going to be responding in that way, right? And so just it helps us to have a little bit of patience with people as we're going on this journey together and understanding where that's coming from. Sometimes that biting, that dog that's biting, they're afraid and it comes from somewhere. It's not that they're a bad dog. There is something inside of them that has been hurt and needs to be healed. All right, so what are some things that we might fear? All right, so just running quickly through the list, a few things to throw out there. There's lots, but a few things. Abandonment. Do we fear abandonment? Absolutely. Rejection is another one. I think we've all experienced that fear of rejection. Standing alone or people being against us, kind of that alone feeling in life. We fear our daily provisions are going without. We fear not having enough. Or being weak and overpowered. Fear oppression or harm coming to us, either physically or emotionally. And we also fear sickness or death. So all of these are different things that we fear. As children, we're dependent on others for survival. As adults, how many of these are rational fears about our imminent physical safety and or survival? We all experience them, but most of the time, these trigger irrational fears in us. It's not an immediate danger in the moment. The truth is that we all have a need for security, and that's an important thing. All right, so fear clings to things such as money, person, strength, self, that are unreliable. So in our fearful, anxious state, we cling to things that are unreliable. And that creates insecurity. A few examples of that, I'll just run through a few examples. We can have the fear of man. Proverbs 29 and 25 says, "The fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord will be kept safe." This is one of the foundational beginning verses that God just hammered into my head for about a year. Every day He was whispering that into my head because I was so afraid of people. I was so afraid of their opinions of me, so afraid of their upset with me that I was in bondage to it. My fear of others and the opinions they had of me would influence my behavior, and it would dominate my thinking, and it would rob me of the peace that Jesus' death had bought for me, which would ultimately accomplish its purpose of trapping me outside of God's mercy and grace. So this is a biggie, and I think every single person ever has wrestled with this one a little bit. The fear of man, the fear of their opinions, the fear of their approval, being afraid of losing it, being afraid of, but this is an unreliable thing because it can come and it can go, right? And yet sometimes we depend on these things or we rely on them, and we're let down, aren't we? And that happens over and over again, and it creates insecurity. Another one is wealth. Proverbs 11:28. "Those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf." So wealth, sometimes we're dependent. Money is our security blanket. If I don't have enough, then then I can't be okay, right? When Aaron and I went to university, we learned that lesson of having to rely on God because it was difficult having a family going to school full time, and we didn't have enough money, and so there's so much fear and anxiety. We're like, oh, how are we going to pay everything? How are we going to have food? And just learning to let go of that and to rely on God to provide for us was a huge one because just letting go of money as our security blanket, it can create a lot of anxiety. Even just, I don't know, I have a couple the stock market. I don't know if anyone watches that or not, but in the past month I was kind of reminded of that lesson because there's a lot of turmoil in the stock market, and in a couple of days there's like a massive plummet, like a biggest one in about 5 years. And it was just a reminder that, hey, you know what, you can't depend on these things, because today it could be there, tomorrow it could be gone. All right, another one is the strength of others. Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in mankind and makes flesh his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." That's a big one. If you're depending on others, if that's where you're going to get your security from, you're going to be let down. I think we've all encountered that in our lives at some point. Proverbs 28:26 says, "He who trusts in his own heart is a fool, but he who walks wisely will be delivered." So forgetting God, we place confidence in the things of the world that can be stolen or broken or destroyed, and therefore need to be defended, right? It's an unreliable thing. The more the fear of God diminishes, the more we become afraid of our fellow man and have anxiety. So worry is a negative meditation. It's fixating on something that's negative. When you consider how much we worry about things that don't even actually happen, it's just a negative meditation that's increasing your anxiety in life. So faith then is clinging to God, who is reliable and therefore creates security. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know. Looks kind of small now. So faith is clinging to God, who is reliable, and this creates security. So here's a question for you. Is fear a lack of faith?
Some would say that.
Yeah,
Some would say that
Yeah.
you don't have enough faith.
Yeah. I'd like to suggest that actually fear, having more fear is more faith. And I'm going to say it in this way. It's just a misdirected faith. You're believing in the bad thing to happen, rather than believing in God to allow for the good thing to happen. So our fear is actually faith in the bad. So it's a kind of a big thought to consider. So the object of our faith is greater than the quality of our faith. So that just kind
We're
of
having big aha moments here at this table, so.
good. So fear is a trap or death, a stronghold of the enemy designed to kill, steal, and destroy us. Our emotions, our relationships, our victory, and our inheritance in Christ, our peace and our purpose. So this is a big deal. And that's why I'm so excited to be sharing this with you, because I feel like we have been robbed, and we are continually being robbed. And I want to shine a light on this robbery, and I want to make it stop, because God has given us this inheritance, and I don't want it to get stolen from us anymore.
Amen.
Luke 10:19 says, "I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you." I want to live in this truth. God has given this to us. We need to take hold of that. So we've been given all authority to overcome the enemy, but we are often living in defeat. Our fear causes us to make agreement to Satan that gives him a legal right to be with us. So I'll explain that. Amos 3:3 says, "Do two..." Maybe there we go. "Do two walk together unless they have agreed to do so?" We must give permission in order to be walking in relationship. Nothing happens without our agreement. The only exclusion to that I want to make is that children are dependent. They don't have that choice. We're talking about a normal adult life. Children are dependent. They don't have the choice. So it's a special exception for them, and we can all understand that. But we also need to consider, too, that sometimes in our emotional insecurity or our dysfunctions, we're also dependent in our adulthood. And because of this dependency, this unhealthy dependency, it creates agreements that with that creates footholds in our heart that lead to strongholds. So just to understand, footholds, I remember reading that so many times in the Bible, and I kind of knew the generality of it, but then finally one day I was like, what does that mean? I'm not much for military stuff, and I was like, I gotta know what this is. So footholds is a secure position. It's especially a firm basis for further progress or development. So it's kind of getting that foot in the door. And that makes easy sense when you kind of consider it that way. It's the door's been opened, the foot's been put in there. So they're not in yet, but they have a secure spot that they can make further progress. And that's what our agreements create. And the stronghold is a well-fortified place. So that's when, you know, this place is secure. It's got a solid barrier. All right, so how does fear affect our behavior? All right, so as we were talking about, and this is just kind of a recap, irrational fear is instilled through past punishment, sin or wounds, that causes internal wounding. And, the experiential result of that is insecurity. And this insecurity causes us to build fortresses to keep things out. We build those walls around us, right? That become a stronghold versus living as God's temple. So the difference there is that when we get hurt, we put up these big barriers. No one can penetrate in. Rather than living with the openness that we can have relationship with others, they can come and go, we invite them in love. Sorry. And I have to confess, that was something I really wrestled with in all of my brokenness and all of my hurt. I placed this great big huge wall and I isolated myself because I was so afraid of what people would do to me, and I was like, I can't take anymore. So I placed this great big wall and I had my arms out like this. I was like, you know what, I love you, but I can't let you any closer into my space because it's just too painful, and I can't risk having you throw anything else at me because I can't handle anything else. And, you know, in some ways that did keep some of the difficult circumstances out of my life, but it also kept the good things out of my life. You can't have relationships when you're living in that place, and when you need help, there is no help because you haven't let anyone in, right? So this is not the answer. It was my fearful response, my building that fortress around my heart, and it's something that God has had to slowly take down, because that is not a place of victory. That is a place of retreat, right? And so that's that was what happened there. And this insecurity can also motivate us to control. We feel insecure internally. We feel fearful about what's happening around us. So we try to control what's going on around us. We can't control others, but we try. You know, we want to prevent more wounding from happening, and we want to make life more favorable, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about control and kind of open up that a little bit. So what is control? It seeks to influence, manipulate, and direct people's behavior or the course of events and circumstances around them. So that's what control is. There's two reasons why this might happen. The first one is a defensive reason, like we've been talking about, that fortress is born out of fear. It's an attempt to mediate the damage for ourselves and to prevent further damage from occurring, right? So this is our defense mechanism kicking in here. It's to avoid pain, and in the absence of feeling like I had influence on my external surrounding and circumstances, I tried to control and to manipulate to achieve what I wanted. And in the absence of feeling like I had a choice or had any power to be free from the negative circumstances, I tried to change them. And this is very common. I think we have all, at some point in our lives, tried to do this. The second reason It's already up there. Is an offensive reason, is born out of pride. In our sinful natures, we want to promote ourselves, advance ourselves, so we can try to control others and our circumstances to try to advance ourselves. We're not going to focus too much on that one. That's a whole different series. We are going to look at the defensive one. So there's 3 sides to control. The first one is manipulation. So it uses deceit or trickery to influence and is most interested in being accepted. So there's a motivator behind there. Some examples of manipulation is to withhold information. It's to do things and say things to position yourself to look good. And sometimes in order to do so, you have to put someone else down to manipulate people's opinions, right? You might feel threatened by others, and so you don't want to help them. Or you can complain or slander or gossip to try to make someone look less and yourself look better. It can be deceitful, or it can operate in avoidance. There's all kinds of ways that we can try to manipulate our circumstances or the thoughts and opinions of others out of our fearfulness, out of our brokenness. There is also domination. It pushes forward, it crushes everything and anyone in their path. It's kind of like an army type, just it's going. It forces the will of others and is most interested in winning. So dominance crosses over personal boundaries of respect and honor for another. So this is why this is an issue, right? It's great to accomplish things, but it's not great to accomplish it at the expense of others, right? So that's just another attempt, or another control type. And the last one, the third one that we're going to look at is, examples, of domination is to attempt to be above other people, to see others as below you. Being disrespectful to people, like I said, crossing over their personal boundaries, not respecting that. To compete with another, because you want to appear better than that other person. And aggressiveness, these are all kind of domination characteristics. There's also intimidation. And that is trying to gain control over others by frightening them, by getting in their faces. And they're most interested in being right. So they can be aggressive, or you can be aggressive and combative, ready to defend your position, ready to, they want to get the last word, and anger as well. Those are a couple manifestations of control. So I just want to take a quick second, and I want you to look at the person beside you, and you're going to play a little game. So I think we all know the game of rock, paper, scissors. So I want you just to take a moment, and I want you to play rock, paper, scissors, and do it a couple rounds, and then so go ahead, you can play rock, paper, scissors. Alright. Okay, I'm gonna reel you in. That was just a little bit of fun. Alright, you're just gonna grab your attention again. I'm glad. How'd you guys make out? Did you have some fun there? Did anyone win all of their rounds? Did anyone win all of their rounds of rock, paper, scissors? Yeah. Alright. I want to read you something. There's a book, and it comes out of the book called Conquering the Game of Control. It's by Craig Green. And I just wanted to read a little paragraph now that we've had our fun playing rock, paper, scissors. And he was talking about this control issue that he had encountered. And God was teaching him about control and what to do about it. So God, and this is him speaking, he said God gave him, I'm going to read in the first person because he wrote the first person. All right, so God gave me a powerful but simple picture of the relationship between domination, intimidation, and manipulation, the three sides of control. The rock in the game pictures domination. It dominates the scissors. The scissors correspond to intimidation, shredding the paper with ease, but being crushed by the force of the rock. Paper represents manipulation. Although it is vulnerable to scissors, it has the ability to cover the rock. Because of the fall, we are all born with and refined through social integration, a dominant control technique of manipulation or domination or intimidation. We play the game with each other to see who can control whom. The game, however, is unwinnable, because there are always those others whose control techniques cut us, or crush us, or cover us. In addition, there are some manipulators who are just incredibly good at it. The same is true with dominators and intimidators. Furthermore, just as there are different types of control, there are different levels of ability. Moreover, we humans reserve the right to change our control style when we think it might help us prevail. The result? The absolute mess we call human nature and culture. And that was just such an eye-opening concept to me, that about this control that we exhibit. So here are some of the problems with control as we're expressed. There's no love in operating like this. Love puts others first. Control puts self first. Love is not trampling the weak, even though you could, right? So this is the truth of it. But control, if they see an opportunity, they might take it, right? If you're an intimidator and you see someone that's weaker than you might grab the opportunity to crush. But that's not love. Love is helping others to stand up. Control is not something you can ever fully achieve or win with. It perpetuates the fear cycle. It also means that you do not trust God to heal or to mitigate the circumstance. And it negates God's will because we are focusing on our own will, right? When we're trying to control the circumstances, we're trying to actually get what we want. And fear that comes from this allows Satan free access and agreement to be there. All right, Matthew 20, 25 and 28. But Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles have absolute power and lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them, tyrannizing them. It is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your willing and humble slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many, paying the price to set them free from the penalty of sin." And that's just a reminder, again, right? The world operates in a very different way than God operates. And control is one of those ways. So right here, you can see I have the fear cycle. So we got person A and person B. Person A is trying to be over person B, right? And in turn, person B is trying to be over person A. And that kind of perpetuates this fear cycle of constantly trying to push people down. I like this quote from Joyce Meyer: "Our past may explain why we're suffering, but we must not use it as an excuse to stay in bondage." So, all right. So I just, again, want to reveal Satan's strategy. We've kind of talked about this a little bit. Matthew 6 and 24, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will love or he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." And the Amplified Version says money, possessions, fame, status, or whatever is valued more than the Lord. And Galatians 5, 16 to 17, "Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other, for the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other, so that you do not do what you want." And this is just the truth of where we're at, right? With this, God's way is love. Satan's way is fear and pride. It says in Revelations 12 and 10 that Satan is the accuser of the brethren. "Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, 'Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. So let's remember what Satan is doing while he's frightening us and keeping us in bondage. He's also accusing us, right? So Satan wounds us. He plants seeds of fear, which if allowed to grow, can be used by him to cause further harm. Our pride and fear plants further seeds of fear. We're being used by Satan, or rather we are accomplishing his purposes when we operate out of those things. So we can either God's love can flow through us, or we are in bondage to Satan's fear and accusation, which flows through our sinful nature and woundedness. So now that we can see the two approaches, we're going to talk a little bit about fear and what we've talked about here. We're going to get to the table discussions. And then part 2, we're going to talk about what do we do with this fear. We don't want to continue operating in this. And then part 3, we're going to talk about reclaiming our peace. Awesome. All right. Okay, so part 2. I'm excited about this part because it's great to kind of open our eyes, right, to what fear is and how it impacts our lives and stuff like that. But now, what do we do with it? We need to know what to do with this. All right. So part 2, what do we do with our fear? Romans 8:15 says, "The spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father." So Abba here means daddy. This is a very intimate word used for God. It's not, this just basically means we're children running up to our daddy and throwing up our arms. The significance of adoption is that it's a legal agreement to provide for, to take care of, to take responsibility for. So this adoption, God has said, "You're my children, I will provide for you. I will take care of you. I'm responsible for you." And it's also a legal claim to inheritance. So as children, we have a legal right to an inheritance because he's our father and he has an inheritance for us. But the thing is that when you've been robbed, beaten down, you fear being robbed and beaten down again, don't you? There's a legitimate pain from these things. And knowing our true inheritance of healing and restoration that God gives us can take away the pain, the fear of that pain. But not knowing or forgetting about this truth, that it's available and is promised to us, can leave us operating in fear. So let's take a look at some of what we have available to us. Psalm 107:19-21 said, "Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He sent out his word and healed them, and he rescued them from the grave. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind." All right, so how our thoughts and our heart impact our lives. So let's take a look. We have a heart and we have a mind. What's this relationship and how does that work in our lives? So the heart, Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." So our beliefs are held in our heart. What we truly believe are held. They subconsciously direct our actions and our interactions. So our heart's really important. They can either have a positive or negative effect on us. As I mentioned earlier, my inner belief, and sometimes those inner beliefs can be lies, right? And that is that's where we get led astray. And when you're building a building, if you have a foundational block that's crooked, what's going to happen? Your house is it's going to be crooked. If you have a foundational block in your heart that is crooked or it's been knocked out of line, then you're going to interact in ways that are not in alignment with God's will or with healthy relationships, right? So wounds in our heart can fuel our fear and anxiety about a situation, and we need healing so that they do not negatively affect our beliefs about God or about ourselves or about others, right? So our beliefs are in our heart. Our heart is our operating system. Fear that is stored in our hearts through unhealed wounds are what motivate us to build a fortress around our hearts to try and protect us from further wounds, like we talked about earlier. And it's also what motivates our faulty responses and our anxious preoccupations. So, what can we do about this? Well, let's have a look at our mind. What does our mind do? So there's a difference between what we think and what we believe. Have you ever had that happen? Where you can read a verse and you know in your mind, you know the truth, you know it, but actually you don't know it in your heart, right? There's a connection between the mind and the heart. And when this connection is working properly, it just makes life go easy. You can learn new things, you can grow, and you can mature, and that's the mind-heart connection. But if there's a disconnect here, then it can kind of leave you in kind of in limbo, right? You can know it in your head, but if you don't know in your heart, that's where the belief is held, right? So it says in Romans 12:2, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the way we think can transform our lives because they affect our hearts and can create new beliefs. So it starts in the head, but it needs to sink into the heart. And that is when it becomes an internal belief that will guide our beliefs and our behavior. So this is just a silly little illustration. So, moving to Nova Scotia just in the summertime, I'm getting used to the new environment, the new reality. And in the fall, I read an article about two people that drove off the road and landed in the cold water. Reading this article just invoked some fear in me. I was like, oh, I do not want that to happen to me. That would be horrible. That'd be terrible. So just, I had this new thought in my mind. And then what was funny was that as winter was approaching, when we first got here, I had never really driven over big bridges before, so for some reason this was a very exciting thing for me. I would drive over the bridge, I'm like, woo! That's so cool! I love driving over the bridge, I'm like, it's an awesome view. And it was funny because I would have my kids with me, right? And I'd be like, wow, look at the bridge, look at the view! And they were like, they're just totally not interested at all. I was like, it's exciting, come on! Anyway, I was excited about the bridge. But what I found was all of a sudden, I started getting a little nervous about these bridges after I'd read these articles. So this new idea had been planted in my head, and all of a sudden I'm like, what happens when it's icy? I don't want to. I would hate to have this, fall off the bridge. Now I'm having this fear thought. And I realized that twice I rerouted and I went the long way because I didn't want to go over the bridge. And I just had to stop myself and think, okay, Trey, this is a little ridiculous. You live here now, you got to take the bridge. It's just, this is not okay. And I'm, looking at fear. And so I just, in my mind, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to live like that. That's silly. And Lord, please take care of me on the bridge. And I'm just going to let it go. And I haven't had a single thought yet. And I just go over the bridge now, and I'm back to it. Woohoo! It's exciting again. So it's good. But just that, mental heart progression that happened was kind of a funny illustration of how you get an idea, it starts to sink some fear into your heart. Or you change your mind, and it changes your approach, right? So this mind-heart connection has a big effect. In the Bible, it says, fear not, do not be dismayed. Over 80 times it's listed in the Bible. Fear not, do not be dismayed. And they're listed together. Being dismayed means to break down and courage completely, as by sudden danger or trouble, to be disheartened thoroughly. So fear robs us of our courage. Which is interesting when we look at 1 Timothy 1:7. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. So again, Satan is robbing us through this fear approach. He's robbing us of our courage. So I just wanted to take a quick look. Jesus is our model for all things, right? And even in this, Jesus is our model. When you have a look at the ministry of Jesus, from a human standpoint, living in the time, not having seen it come to completion, would you not think that Jesus' ministry might be perceived as an utter failure?
Yeah.
When you think about it, right? If I was, standing on the sidelines watching, there was public humiliation, he was abused and slandered, he was abandoned, he was mocked, and he was let down by his friends during difficult times. Like when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, his friends kept falling asleep. He's like, please, I need you. And they kept falling asleep. And he was disowned by one of his closest friends in the heat of the moment. And when he died, right, his enemies thought they had defeated him. So the world's view of failure is that it makes you less valuable, or that unworthiest person. Sometimes that can be the effect. But when you look at Jesus, we can learn a lot about by looking at his responses. So during this whole time, while these people are treating him so poorly, while all this mud, we'll call it mud, like we've been talking about, is being thrown at him in various ways. In Luke 23 and 24, it said, Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Jesus had the full understanding of what motivates our heart, of the influence of sin in our lives, of fear, of control. And he understood what was motivating them. They didn't understand. Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they are doing. Although they're doing something and they think they know what they're doing, they don't understand the bigger picture about the spiritual realms at play in our lives. And he understood that. And even in that state, he was able to say, forgive them. They do not know what they're doing. And the same is true for us, too, in our own lives. We expect sometimes for people to be mature and to act maturely towards us, don't we? But often they're not, right? Often they do hurtful things, which is why we're hurt by them. And if you just purely look at the action, it's easy to take that hurt on or take on that rejection. But there's a bigger story at play here. There is more. He wasn't actually afraid of them, so they didn't have any power over him. And God, so while the world was viewing Jesus' ministry as a failure, in God's view, what the world perceived as a failure does not affect your personal worth. Jesus knew this, and he was okay with that. God's grace is sufficient. So quickly, I just want to look back at the verse from the first part. In 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. So as I mentioned earlier, perfected or perfect is not about being perfect in your being, but it's about matureness, about completeness, about wholeness. So perfected is not about personal perfection. It is complete surrender to allow God's perfection to be fully functional in our lives. So that's mature love casts out fear. God is love, and it's a perfect example of this mature love we're talking about. His love casts out fear. The closer we draw to God, the more he's going to cast out our fear. Cast indicates some force. So it's not just asking politely to leave. It's perfect love is going to make that fear go. It's no longer able to stay within you. When we look at 1 Corinthians 13, the love passage, let's be reminded about what love actually is. Sometimes we think of love in the terms of the warm, wonderful feelings that you can have, but love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice over injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. So love is our actions, right? Love is what we do towards another person. So it's just helpful to keep that in mind. If we truly treat one another in this way, would they have anything to fear from us? If someone were to truly treat you in that way, do you think you'd have any fear in your relationship with them? There'd be nothing to fear. No walls needing to be up. Nothing. Like, true love casts out fear. So when we operate in that way, we are helping others to be free of fear. And when others are treating us in that way, they are helping to cast out the fears in our hearts, the insecurities that are in our hearts. So just think of the power of that and what love can do. So this growing in perfection or maturity is another reason we are to forgive. And God understands that. We are all unfinished and in need of grace. Our forgiveness allows or contributes to God's mercy on us while we're maturing into perfect love, which is God's ultimate goal in each of our lives, is to mature into this. The closer we grow to God, the less we want to hurt others, because we understand our true value, and we don't have that need. So let's take a look at some strategies. We want to know what to do with this fear. Philippians Philippians 4 and 6 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. That there is a big statement. Do not be anxious about anything. So that obviously means anything, right? So there's nothing in our lives that we should be anxious about. This is a big statement. I mean, I think you can all understand. You're all in agreement with how big this statement is. Be anxious about nothing. That has not been the case always in my life. So anyway. So this is easy for someone to say. When we look at, Paul was the one that was writing this. This is easy for someone to say that has no current problems. You know, sometimes if life is going well, we can say, yeah, I have no problems. You know, that's easy to say. But as Paul was writing this, though, he was waiting for trial. That's what he was in the midst of when he was writing this passage. And the end result of that could very well have been his death. So it's hard to imagine that he was offering this advice at this time. But this is the place that I want to be in. I imagine every single one of you would like to be in that place too. So how often do we come to God when times are tough with anger or complaint? We need to address our approach, as this passage is saying, in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving. Take your request to God. This seems counterintuitive and unlikely when you're in the grips of fear and anxiety. So how is this accomplished? So let's just look a little, with thanksgiving. So let's just look a little farther down that passage. Philippians 4, 11 to 13. I'm not saying this is the continuation of what Paul's writing. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every circumstance or situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Now, I remember the first time I read that, and I nearly jumped out of my seat. It's like, there's a secret! Yay! You know, because I had been looking for some sort of secret for fixing the circumstances. And then I was so upset because I kept reading, but they didn't say what the secret was. It's like, Paul, you've left me hanging here. Like, you can't say there's a secret to this and then not tell me what it is. And so anyway, I took that question to God, and he has shown me. So what is the secret? Contentment, being fully surrendered and fully trusting or dependent on God for all things. Remember this secret. We're going to talk a lot about it and how we can actually live this out. Because the problem here is there's no halfway on either of these things. It is the gray areas of not being fully surrendered or of not being fully trusting of God that irrational fear and anxiety reside. So these ones are big ones. And I realized I needed to do some work to be free of the gray areas in my life. So let's take a look at some of them. All right, so secret number 1. The secret to contentment is to be fully surrendered. And so what are some ways that we can, first of all, surrender secrecy? Psalm 32, 1 to 11. It says, Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and whose spirit there's no deceit. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. Proverbs 28:13 says, He who conceals his sin does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them find mercy. All right, so secrecy is one of Satan's. So secrecy is one of Satan's most powerful weapons of bondage. Our fear traps us in a painful place, and secrecy serves as a guard to keep us trapped. So secrecy not only affects our emotions, it can also literally have a negative effect on our bodies and our minds. By holding these things in, they can start eating away internally. It can create a sickness in your bodies. It enforces and perpetuates our sense of powerlessness and shame. Sometimes we're afraid to admit our own sinfulness because we fear the consequences and or the rejection that might come from it. But what we know that in 1 John 1 and 18, it says, if we confess our sins, God, He, is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all our wickedness. So there is no fear in that. God, and actually the truth is that God already knows, right? God already knows, so it's not a secret to Him. But when we keep it inside of us, it starts to eat us up. And we need to confess that to Him. We need to get that out. It's kind of like holding balls under the water. Have you ever held beach balls under the water? Maybe you've heard that example before, but you can do it for a time. But then those balls, they want to come up, right? And you can only hold them down for so long. And that's the same with us, too, when we're hiding things inside. Those things are going to come up. So we can either deal with them, or they can just explode on us and create more of a problem. All right, so sometimes, so nothing, okay. Does anyone happen to have a $20 bill just handy?
I actually wanted to bring all those.
Yay, perfect. Just happen to know, hey? Thank you.
I just wanted to touch it again.
So sometimes we feel, we believe the lie that our sinfulness or the wrongdoings that we do affect our worth. They affect our feelings of worth, of value, and whatnot. And maybe you've seen this illustration before, but this was a good one, so might as well do it again. So when you look at this $20 bill, how much is this worth?
$20.
What's this value? $20, right? So that's the same with us. God created us with our value intact. Our worth is our worth, okay? So what happens, sorry, Kate? What happens, say it gets crumpled up. It gets abandoned. It gets kicked and stepped on, and mud thrown at it. Our $20 bill has gotten quite beaten up. Sometimes in life we get beaten up. What's its value?
$20.
It has not changed its value. And we need to remember that for ourselves. The value God gave us by creating us does not change based on the circumstances in our lives or the mud that gets thrown at us or the wrongdoings that we do. In essence, throwing mud at ourselves. Our value, our worth is it doesn't change. It cannot change. It cannot be affected by those things because God has given us our value and we are still worth $20. So remembering that can help us as we move forward. So another one, what else can we surrender? This is a tough one. Surrender of will. Oh, this was one that God had to work really hard on with me. Many years ago, at the beginning of my journey, I would just open up my Bible and see where God would take me, and I didn't always have a reading plan. And there's this certain passage, and I brought my Bible. If you saw it, you would maybe chuckle a little bit because it's got markings all over the place. Because God brought me to it again and again and again and again and again and again and again to the point of ridiculousness. I was like, okay, God, you're really trying to tell me something here. Like, He's really trying to get this lesson sunk deeply into me. I'm going to read you this a part of the passage. It says, Jeremiah 2:20-24. Long ago you broke off your yoke and tore off your bonds. You said, I will not serve you. Indeed, on every high hill and under every spreading tree you lay down as a harlot. I had planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into a corrupt wild vine? Although you washed yourself with soap and used an abundance of cleansing powder, the stain of your guilt is still before me, declares the sovereign Lord. How can you say I am not defiled? I have not run after the Baals. See how you behaved in the valley? Consider what you have done. You are a swift she-camel running here and there, a wild donkey accustomed to the desert, sniffing the wind in her craving. In her heat, who can restrain her? Like, Lord, wow! This is what He kept bringing me to. And betterment, right? Not all of you know my testimony. I was raised in the church. There were challenging situations, and I turned my back on God. I did. I abandoned God. For about 10 years, I couldn't. I have been broken and hurt in ways, and I was afraid, really. And so I hid. I did. And what I realized through reading this passage, and I came back to God very slowly, very tentatively. And what I realized is that it was like I was this picture that he kept showing me in my head was of this wild horse just running in the fields. And I realized, you know what, that wild horse is beautiful, free, independent, but at the same time, and you couldn't get too close to that horse, right? Like, because they would just run away on you. And in my fear, I had separated myself, and I was unwilling to let go of control of my life by getting too close. And while the wild horse was beautiful, just as it was, you know what? It could have carried on with life just as it was, and that was okay. Running free in whatever direction I wanted, I was of no use to the farmer in accomplishing anything. I could not be used to help plow or to help the team pull and accomplish anything. And this is what God was trying to speak into my heart. As God showed me this image, he also revealed that it was my choice. I could continue on as I was, or I could allow him to work in me to, I could allow him, the farmer, the opportunity to tame me so that I could be usable for his purposes. 2 Timothy 2:20 and 22, it says, in a large house there are articles not only of gold and silver, but also wood and clay. Some are for special purposes and some for common use. Those who cleanse themselves from the latter will be instruments for special purposes, made holy, useful to the master, and prepared to do any good work. I wanted to be used for a special purpose, but I first needed to be bridled and tamed, and I needed to surrender my will and allow God to cleanse me from my wild or selfish ways. My fear was stopping me, though. Would I ever recover from the pain of this? Would God lead me into a place of nothing, or was God leading me to a place of nothingness? This was my fear, because I had no experience with this, right? When I finally said yes, I was brought into the pen and harnessed, and it broke me. But in a good way. Although it was painful, the farmer does not do this to harm the animal, but to take them to a new and better reality. It is a process, and it takes time. Each day it is a willful choice to allow God to do his pruning work in our lives so that we can become fully surrendered to his will and not my will. As I submitted, the restraints loosened. Right? As when you're breaking a horse. The restraints loosened, and I realized I was free to take off if I wanted to, but my love for God had grown so deep that I didn't want to be anywhere but with him. And I was no longer a slave, but I was a friend of God. And now he could use me for his purposes. So, surrender of will, it is a tough one, but there's immense benefit in allowing God to work with that. Another one is the surrender of pride. So the symptoms of fear, the hurt and anger that you might experience, often have more to do with our own issues than with what the other person is doing, right? So while there are occasions in the Bible that refers to pride in a positive sense, the pride of the land or of God's pride, majesty, what we're talking about is the negative sense of pride. The main Hebrew root, the most common term, I'm not going to pronounce it, which occurs a total of 23 times, and includes the idea of arrogance or cynical insensitivity to the needs of others and presumption. So pride is both a disposition, both an attitude and disposition, and it's a type of conduct. So what constitutes a proud person? The negative sense of pride points to a sinful person who shifts their ultimate confidence or focus from God to self. And in truth, I used my pride as a major defense system. I felt if I didn't look out for my own self-interests, then who else would? If I didn't prove my own worth, then who would recognize it? And this is just kind of the faulty thinking of pride, right? But there's a problem with this approach. In 1 Peter 5:5-3, it says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Or Romans 8:31, it says, when we say, if God is for us, then who can be against us? So if God opposes the proud, we're not in a good position, are we? So I remember long ago, at the beginning of learning how to do events and whatnot, I was putting on this event and worked really hard. And then at the last minute, a whole bunch of people just weren't able to come. And I was feeling the anxiety, right, of, oh no, I'm going to show up, no one's there, sort of thing, that fear, right, that happens. And I was upset. And so I went and I took this to God in prayer. And so I was praying, and I was like, Lord, I felt let down, and I was asking people, or I was asking him to kind of work on the people, and, because in my upset I felt, this letdown. And I realized that, and then at one point I felt the Holy Spirit prompting me, saying, are you praying in love? And I was kind of like, no, actually I'm not. Sometimes you just have to own the things that you're doing. And I knew I wasn't, and I had to stop. So I asked God, I was like, okay, then if I can't use this approach, Lord, can you just help me? I'm in this bad spot, and help me understand why I'm experiencing this anxiety, and what do I do about it? Because I was now at a loss. So he kind of took me on this thing called what I call Y times 5. And I encourage you, anytime you're experiencing anxiety, do this, and it can help you. I do it all the time now, so don't be afraid of anxiety or upset, but ask God to help you understand and to free you from what you're experiencing. So first of all, I said, okay, so why am I experiencing this intense anger, or this intense anxiety? Well, because I'm angry because I feel let down and abandoned. All right, so why do I feel let down and abandoned? Okay, if I really think about it, if I'm really honest, we have to own our feelings, right? I don't want to experience the loneliness of being alone. That's kind of really what it is. And then I was like, okay, well, all right, so what am I afraid, why am I afraid to be alone at that moment? What am I afraid will happen? What is prompting this? Well, actually, to be honest, because I'm afraid of feeling like I failed, really. Okay, God, I confess that. I'm afraid that I'll feel like I failed. All right, so why am I afraid that I'll feel like I've failed? If people just aren't able to come, why have I failed? Well, actually, when I think about it, when I confess it, when I actually look at it, I'm actually afraid of feeling embarrassed publicly. Really? That's really at the heart of it. So why am I afraid of being embarrassed publicly? And honestly, it's because I'm afraid it'll hurt my pride. It's hard to be honest with what you're truly feeling. But you know what? God is merciful and gracious, and He doesn't want you wrestling with anxiety. He wants to lead you through to help you to understand it so that He can take it from you. And it's not because He wants to embarrass you. This is God. He's not going to laugh at you or abandon you or forsake you or anything. So in those anxiety moments, really go to God and ask Him, what's going on? Why is this? And when you kind of feel some sort of understanding, ask it again. Okay, well, why is this? And keep going deeper until you get to the root of what is actually causing this anxiety. And then, with that realization, my prayers changed. And that is God's purposes in our life, right? In humility, same circumstances, I went to God in my pride, and I was upset with people. And He's like, you could be praying in love. And now, having gone through this exercise, I went to Him in humility. And I was like, God, you know what? I feel like this small child. And I couldn't change what was happening, but I could give God my fear and my hurt and ask Him for help. And He cares so deeply about my hurts, my sorrows. And when I approach Him in humility as a child, He's there to lift me up and to wipe away my tears. So as I turned my upset over to Him, my anxiety turned to peace. And I realized it didn't matter to me anymore. Funny. I had given God my hurt, I had given that, and God had given me His peace. And I was still going to go and use the time to praise God and make the most of it. I was like, well, you know what? I'm still going to do it. And my heart had changed, right? My approach had changed. And to my surprise, it turned out to be an incredible time. And it was such a valuable teaching time to me that I'm thankful that I went through that. Even if it hadn't turned out to be, this great time, I was having a great time. And I was in there, and it was good because I was in alignment with God. So that's one approach when you're feeling anxiety. Just get down to the root there. All right, so the next one is the surrender outcome. Again, let's go back to Jesus. This is a big one, guys. Let's understand that one. Luke 22:40-44. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Again, from human standard, what Jesus was going through could be perceived as a failure, right? So Jesus, he knows what's coming. I could not do what he did. That's all I can say. And he was legitimately feeling practical fear, knowing that what was about to happen would be agonizing and humiliating. Of course he asked God to be spared. That just proves he was sane, right? He said, I don't want to do this. Honestly, this is not a good thing. But your will be done, Lord. So he demonstrated perfect submission through the Father's will and his Father's desired outcome. As we mentioned earlier, by human account, the crucifixion was a failure, but it was God's will. What people could not see in the moment was the victory and the glory that was to come. As Jesus was right in the height of his agony, we already covered that. Jesus asked again, he asked for forgiveness. So what does forgiveness do? It's a release, right? What you hold on to impacts your ability to trust and to be free of fear. It's like a chain that attaches to you. We are always to forgive, which is to release others from the debt of sin that they owe us. However, if trust is broken by that sin against us, it needs to be rebuilt, which takes time. So let's understand there's a difference there. Forgiveness and trust, they're two very different things. We are to forgive, we are to release them from the debt. But if someone has abused you or, you need to rebuild that trust, okay? We're not just talking about naively just, let's just be a perfect relationship here. There is a difference between forgiveness and the reestablishment of trust. Can we surrender our outcomes so fully to God that we trust him even in the darkest of circumstances? Psalm 23:4, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil because God is with us. And the word there for dark shadow, it means dark shadow. So God is light. The darkness has to hide. The challenge here is that I recognize that I was all right with surrendering to what I perceived was a good outcome. But what about when the outcome doesn't appear good? That, I think, is the big challenge. 2 Corinthians 4:18 gives us a clue to... So we don't look at the troubles we can see now. Rather, we fix our gaze on things that cannot be seen. For the things we see now will be gone soon, but the things we cannot see will last forever. So it's kind of keeping our fix. Okay. All right, so the second part is learning to trust God. I know this isn't the case for everyone, but for some, and especially those that are very fearful and anxious, life has dealt them some very big blows, and being able to their ability to trust has been broken, right? So this is a big one we need to talk about. We talked about the abused dog earlier and how they engage in life. So this is Satan's strategy. He wounds us by throwing sin at us, deceives us into believing we're not valuable or cared about, let the wounds in our hearts get infected, and it breaks our ability to trust and leaving us in this place of feeling defeated. People are imperfect. If that trust is broken, or if we never learn to develop trust, that we will be cared for, it's difficult to operate in a place of trust, all right? There's a difference between trusting God and trusting people, so that's a very big point there. In John 24, 24 to 25, Jesus did not commit himself unto them, for he knew what was in a man. So I just want to talk about that trust, because there's a very big difference between trusting people and trusting God. God is trustworthy. Okay? Oswald Chambers, in his My Utmost for His Highest, he writes this: "Our Lord trusted no man, yet he was never suspicious, never bitter, never in despair about any man, because he put God first in trust. He trusted absolutely in what God's grace could do for any man. If I put my trust in human beings first, I will end in despairing of everyone. I will become bitter, because I've insisted on man being what no man ever can be." Absolutely right. Never trust anything but the grace of God in yourself or in anyone else. So Jesus is our model. He did not entrust himself to the masses, although he always had a love and compassion for them. And this is what we want to learn to grow in. He did have a few close friends with his disciples, and he always had a perfect trust in God. So God wants to teach us how to trust again, which comes through intimacy with him. Sometimes when our trust has been broken by people, it can affect our trust of God, right? Because we just out of unawareness, we assume the same of God as with people, but that is not the case. So intimacy can exist to the depth of trust that exists between two people. So if there's no trust, there's no intimacy. You can have a relationship with no intimacy, but you cannot have intimacy without relationship. If you're unable to trust, you will be unable to have deep intimacy. Living in the place of fearing God, in the absence of understanding God's ability and care for me, I've tried to make things happen, control, and I've lived in the gray areas of anxiety and fear. All right, so what is God's grace? It's not permissiveness of sin. It's the space God allows for me to stand up when I recognize the vastness of my inadequacies or the truth of my sinfulness and how much I deserve to be punished. Grace is about extending a hand to help stand up, even though you deserve to be judged. So it is a covering. It is a covering. The Bible says love covers over a multitude of sin. And the purpose of this is not just to let everyone do everything, but it's to allow room to grow. God extends this grace because he knows we're going to mess up, and we need some space to grow. We need, some growing space. We need to trip and fall and stumble. And so he offers this grace to us right now. So from this, our fear, from the fear that we've gotten from Satan, because we believe we lack the knowledge relationship with God and his true nature of love, is driven out. First of all, by knowing God's true nature. That comes from the mind, reading the word. And then by experiencing God's true nature, which is the belief that settles in our heart. So we're extended grace, and in this area of grace, fear can be cast out by the love that we're experiencing, which first comes from knowing God's true nature, from our minds and reading the word, and then by experiencing God's true nature, or the truth of what we have learned. And that's a belief that settles in our heart. So, just to quickly run over, the Bible tells us many things. But we will not fear abandonment, rejection, if we believe and know or trust God will never leave us. I have some scripture passages in there. The Lord says he will never leave us or forsake us. We will not fear judgment if we have known or experienced God's grace. We will not fear that we can lose God's love if we trust and have experienced his faithfulness. That was a big one for me. I always felt I could lose God's love if I didn't behave. And it was really through some of the most vulnerable and darkest times that I learned the truth of God's tenderness for me and his faithfulness. I should have lost his love. If he operated the way people operate it, right? I should have lost it. But God has been faithful, and he has been right there. And I now know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I cannot lose God's love. Ephesians 3:17 says, I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of God, of Christ, and to know his love that surpasses knowledge. All right. When I enter into the place of rest with God, there I'm safe to let my defenses down completely with no fear of attack or betrayal. There my true gentleness is safe to emerge. I'm able to breathe. I'm able to poke my head out. There's also, there are times when I'm powerless to stop someone's attack or attempt to control me. There are times I need to retreat behind the veil, under God's wing. There's some passages there. You can go over those passages. You can claim those passages as the truth there. And also God's pure love. Ultimately, God's pure love creates security, which is that need that we have. We have that need for security. So God's pure love creates security. It's the ultimate safe place, the place where our anxieties can be called, where our peace can flow, where we can rest. And that's the state that I want to be in. All right, so as I started to learn how to trust God, my relationship was like that of a parent and child. I could believe what I was told, but I also had to learn through experiences that God could be trusted and he was my safety. The first time I let go was the hardest because I had no assurance of the outcome. If you have not if you have not started to let go and allow God, then it's hard because you don't know the outcome. But as I've let go, as I've increasingly obeyed God and drawn closer, I've seen the positive outcome, and now I can obey quicker now because I know, right? Some of that, but as God has been faithful and trustworthy with my heart, I've grown in my ability to trust. Some of that was learning how to trust his discipline and realizing his intentions for me were good, and that his discipline leads me to a better place and greater peace. So as a child, I clung to him for my safety. I hid beneath him for my shelter. I looked to him for my guidance. I watched him to learn. I went to him to vent my frustration and to hash out my worries. So that was me as a child with God. Now I'm learning to be his friend. So I'm still going to him as a child, absolutely. But now I'm learning how to be his friend. And this is a part of the maturing process. As a child, it was all about me. I would go to God when I needed to. It was all about what I needed. It was about what I wanted. It was about my growth and my development. But as a friend, I'm desiring to be with him just to spend time and just to build relationships. So now I want to go to God just to hang out and just to walk with him and to be with him and to help him in what he's doing. And in that, there was great joy. Now, all right, so reclaiming your peace. We're in section number 3 here. Isaiah 26:3. You will be kept in perfect peace, those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Again, powerful statement. And the key thing here is that we must remain steady, because it's in the place of trust and rest that God's peace is found. And doubt, the first one there, it causes us to fall back into that gray area of fear and anxiety. Remember how I was saying it's secret to contentment is fully surrender and fully trust. It's when we have our doubts and insecurities that causes us to fall back in the gray area. All right. James 1:5-7. If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like the wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind.
Yeah.
And it's not a cruelty on God's part. It's just a reality of what happens when we doubt, because we're not trusting, we're not resting in the truth of God and His ability to take care of that situation. If we got that natural insecure doubt sensation, it pulls us back into that gray area where anxiety can rest. So this is not a statement of judgment, it's just only a fact. We cannot be at peace while we are being plagued with doubt and insecurity. God understands this and leads us into a place of His perfect peace if we will let Him. As I was beginning in my journey into trusting God, one of my greatest comforts was this. Mark 9, 22 and 24. But if I could do it, Jesus said, everything is possible for the one who believes. And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. And I took such great comfort in that verse because many times I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. Remember we were talking about that mind-heart connection? Sometimes I do. In my mind I believe. Lord, I haven't gotten to that place of experience in order to believe in my heart. So Lord, I believe. In my mind, I believe. Help my unbelief. Help me to get that belief down into my heart. And He is faithful and just to do just that. So have patience on yourself. I had to learn to have patience on myself. I was like, I believe. Why don't I believe? Lord, help me with my unbelief. And He will. And you know what? God knows that. He knows our human nature and our frailty as people. All right. So in Romans 8:26, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. So the next point here, as we're living in that place of grace, as we're growing and as we're maturing and as we're learning to trust, these things all take time. The Spirit will help fill us and fill in the gaps for us as we're growing in maturity. So that just kind of gives us a little bit of breathing room, right? You know what? You're not on your own in this. You're not walking alone in this. You're not growing alone in this. God knows where you are at. God knows where you need to go. And in that in-between space, the Holy Spirit is there, helping you, praying for you, interceding for you. And you are not in this alone. So that was also great encouragement. But I want to talk, and so now that we can kind of put a little peace in our mind as far as our journey goes and give ourselves a little grace in this process of maturing and claiming our peace, I want to talk about some strategies for reclaiming your peace. So the first one that I want to look at is a shift in perspective. 2 Kings 6:15-17. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So the Hebrew word here for see, open his eyes so that he may see, is not as a spectator, but as a participant of the experience. So he was praying for a servant to see, to understand, to know what was happening, what was going on. So both men saw the same conditions, but they had different responses because of what they saw. The servant was only looking at what was right before him, which is so often the case when we're in anxiety or feeling fear. We're looking at what's right in front of us. He saw horses, he saw chariots that were about to come and hurt him. And so often that's what we see, is what's right before us. We see this person coming at us. We see this person trying to hurt us. And we see that and we're afraid, like the servant is. But Elisha saw something beyond that. We've talked about how our fight is not with flesh and blood, which is right before us, but against the powers and principalities of evil forces, right? So we need to look beyond what is happening. So the new vision, Elisha was seeing what was happening in the spiritual realm as well. So the new vision transcended the surrounding conditions, and the servant was able to see the far greater reality that was surrounding the conditions that he saw. So there's a relationship between what you see and the reactions of the two men. So what is surrounding our conditions when we experience anxiety or fear? We fear our surrounding conditions because we interpret them outside of the understanding that there's a far greater reality surrounding them, right? So we need to shift our perspective. Elisha did not pray that God would change the circumstances. Interestingly, he prayed instead that his servant's eyes would be open to this greater reality. And that is our prayer today. I cannot change what surrounds me, but I can ask for a different perspective. A perspective that transcends what surrounds me without being in denial of it. We see what's happening, right? We're not here to deny what is actually in front of us, but we need to open our eyes to the greater surrounding. At some point, in order to walk in God's peace and the victory that has already been won, we've got to gain a perspective change to realities that transcends the physical world. We have to start looking from a spiritual place. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2 shows how Jesus demonstrated that. He said, let us throw off anything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. As we talked about, in the moment, what Jesus saw, if he was just looking at what was right before him, he saw a mob of people that were insulting him and hurting him and rejecting him. But he was seeing from the spiritual. So much so, he understood the spiritual so much so, that he asked for forgiveness because he knew the people didn't understand what they were doing. So I wanted to share a little testimony. I had it written out. This comes from something I shared earlier, so I'm just going to read it. Hopefully that's okay. And it talks about how God gave me a shift in perspective and the power that can come from that shift. So as a pastor's wife, as I talked earlier, I just, in my own experiences growing up, there were reasons that I was afraid and nervous about other people's opinions of me, and I really walked in that fear of being afraid of other people's opinions and feeling judged, right? Feeling like I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't measure up. So this is the story. So, as a pastor's wife, I really am a single mom on Sunday mornings, carrying the expectation that my attendance is a must. When Aaron leaves first thing in the morning and is busy dealing with the service when we arrive. So I was on my own. I'm talking about in the past. This was something that happened when I had when our children were all very young. I just took a clip out of a larger thing. So I was on my own to get 3 babies up, dressed, fed, changed, napped, and out the door into church, where I then needed to contain all 3 of those babies in their seats quietly by myself. And all the while, I was being scrutinized by others. I didn't realize just how much of a distraction our little ones were creating until I was invited out for coffee by an elder of the church, where I was kindly reminded twice that a pastor could be asked to step down from their position if their children didn't behave. I was shocked. Could this be true? That old familiar terror I had been running from hit me over the head. I had been seen and found lacking. I knew I'd read every book I could, tried every disciplined approach I could think of, wept on my knees praying for wisdom, and in that moment of confrontation, I had the utter realization that I had nothing else up my sleeve that I could do to try to solve the situation. I felt defeated and judged and alone, as if the weight of the world were on my shoulders and I was responsible for it all. Now I believe my failure as a mother was going to cost our family everything that we've been working so hard for because I could not contain our children well enough. I was devastated. So how many times have we been devastated by something someone has said to us? I think we all have at some point or other. The perk of living in a parsonage, I was living in a parsonage right beside the church, is that you could quite easily go over to the church for your own private prayer time, which is exactly what I did that night. I remember lying at the front of the church on the altar, crying and pouring my heart out to God. It was as if all along I had hoped I could prove myself worthy of something to God, that somehow I could show him I was not a failure. But that night I came face to face with the cold reality that there's nothing I can do for God. As I prayed, I laid all of my hurt and failings that I had felt over the years, all of my shortcomings that I knew were still there, along with the deep sorrowful realization that I literally had nothing of value that I could do for him, onto the altar. At the end, and despite of all the junk inside of me that I had just given to him, I knew in my heart of hearts that I loved him. I remember praying, God, I am so sorry that I have failed you and that I have absolutely nothing of value to give you. All I know is that I love you with all of my heart. It is not often that you hear the audible voice of God internally, but that day I heard his voice, and as hearing his voice will often do, it changed my life. Without missing a beat in the moment I prayed and expressed my love to him, I heard, Tracy, that is all I have ever wanted from you. In an instant, I understood. It didn't matter if I could do things for God. It didn't matter if I failed by my own standards or if I had lived up to the expectations of others. What mattered is that I loved God, and with that he was pleased. What I realized is that love is just simply love, and whether I had the capacity to love God a little bit or a lot, it was all a blessing to him. I could not fail at loving God, and it was all that he was wanting from me. All the fears I carried and expectations I've been trying to live up to were not from him. In that moment, I was set free, and I began my journey into discovering the great love of God. The image of God with the lightning rod ready to strike me has been replaced with the understanding of Jesus as my comforter, with arms wide open, waiting for me to come to him when life is taking its toll. My fear of failure and judgment of others has been replaced with a true understanding of God's mercy and grace over my weaknesses. His loving intent is to heal and set me free from the wounds and bondages that I admit I still sometimes carry. With that nod of affirmation, I have been learning to let go of the opinions of others and to release myself from trying to be a perfect mom or a perfect pastor's wife. In doing so, I have been learning to release our children as well from the expectations of others, and instead have sought to guard them and allow them the freedom to be kids that are still learning and growing in love, as any other children in the church are. As parents, my husband and I are committed to doing our very best to teach and love them, to do everything within our power to raise them up to be responsible adults who love and serve God. But I'm also learning how to allow God to fill in any of the gaps that our ability as parents might have. It would be wonderful to say that with that grace and freedom, that suddenly our children became the wonderfully behaved children that people would hope for in a pastor's family, but indeed, that has not been the case. But the fear I carried about being judged and other people's opinions of me has changed, and it has brought peace. And that was the perspective shift that God did in my life in that particular moment. And so one way of reclaiming your peace is to go to God with the anxiety and the fears that you're carrying and ask for God, change my perspective, Lord. Show me something different. It was the very thing I feared that God used to set me free. So in that, it was a blessing, right? Sometimes we ask God, I don't want to experience this difficult thing because it hurts. But sometimes God uses that to actually set you free from it. So it's not a bad thing, right? We have to trust God. That's why we trust him. Another strategy, as I kind of have been talking a little bit, is to cast your care. Cast your cares. That kind of falls in line with what I was just talking about right there. Psalm 55:22, cast your cares on the Lord and he will sustain you. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Nothing is impossible with God. Nothing of eternal significance is possible without God. All right, another strategy is to guard your hearts. It kind of seems counterintuitive, right? When we're talking about this love and whatnot, but the Bible tells us to guard your heart, for out of it is the wellspring of life. Now the big difference here is a fortress is built to keep everything out. When you get your defensive walls up, you're guarding everything, the good and the bad, from coming out. And that's where the problem is. When you guard your heart, it's as if you have it's okay to have a guard, and when whatever circumstance or whatever is approaching you, you can assess, is this harmful? Then I will guard. Is this okay? Then you can be open to receive, right? So we're not in love becoming doorposts for people just to use and abuse, but you can guard your heart because you want to, because out of that is a wellspring. So a couple of verses here. Colossians 3:15, let the peace of Christ rule your hearts, since as members of one body you were all called to peace. 2 Chronicles 16:9, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. So it's important, as I was mentioning earlier, to recognize the different kinds of pain. A couple verses to help understand that difference and what I was talking about, guarding your heart and allowing in the good and protecting from the evil. Corinthians 7:10, godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. So you want to guard your heart from that worldly sorrow, because you don't, that's where you start imploding inside, and you start feeling unworthy, and you start, so that is Satan's tactic to destroy you and to crush you, right? So you need to guard your heart from that, because that's not our inheritance from God, right? But sometimes we are going to feel godly sorrow, and you don't want to guard yourself from that, because God wants to use that to purify and to raise you up. So you need to understand the different kinds of pain in this life. Another example here is Proverbs 27:6. It says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. That's a big statement too. So if you've got your guard in place, if you can't just deny anyone from speaking freely in love with you, right? Wounds from a friend can be trusted because they're going to speak truth to you, and that's going to help you to stand up and to walk in godliness, right? That's a good kind of pain that you actually want to allow in, because that's going to help you to stand and to rise into that next level. And so you can't be afraid of that pain, so wounds from a friend can be trusted. A true friend is going to, in love, speak truth. And you can trust that, even if sometimes that kind of hurts a little bit. That truth is actually going to set you free, right, from where you're at. A friend is only going to do that in love. So you can trust that. But an enemy multiplies kisses. So there's that guard again, right? Just because someone's flattering you doesn't mean it's for good purpose. It doesn't mean you can trust them. So again, there's that guard. You need to recognize the different kinds of pain. So that guard is to allow the good in. Sometimes that good is painful, and you need to allow that in, because that's God doing His purifying work. And sometimes there's just bad coming in from sinful nature, Satan trying to destroy you, and you need to set that guard, because that's not a part of God's plan and purpose for your life. So learning how to recognize different kinds of pain. The next one is to set boundaries. Sometimes, and I know I had great confusion with this one. At first, trying to live out this godly life and live in love, I kind of felt like I set myself up to just be constantly abused, right? But that's not God's plan either. Setting that guard is setting a boundary on your heart. It's there's a great book. Maybe Heidi might know the author, or you could talk with Heidi. I don't know. Boundaries by Dr. Cloud and Townsend. It's a great book on setting godly boundaries in order to know when to say yes, when to say no, how to operate in godliness. So boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and where someone else begins. So these are good things. Exodus 19:12 says, you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, beware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. This sets a boundary for the people, and it explains the consequences. So boundaries, separate you from the other person. It explains consequences, and it shows us what we're responsible for, and they help us define what we are not responsible for. We are not responsible to live out the lives of others. We are not responsible for, so it helps us to separate, what we need to take care of, what they want to. Boundaries define consequences of not respecting the boundary, but it also needs to be clearly communicated. We can't expect people to read our minds. So if we're learning how to set boundaries, but we don't actually tell people what the boundary is, or the consequence of that, then that causes great confusion. And so that's just another important part. So as I talked earlier, Jesus was disowned by Peter, and he was freely forgiven by Jesus, after the resurrection. Jesus really forgave Peter. But it was interesting that he asked Peter 3 times before they continued their relationship, Peter, do you love me? 3 times he asked that, because that was Jesus reestablishing trust with Peter. So, again, Jesus is just our perfect model. So he was forgiven, absolutely. There was no nothing. But then Jesus took steps to reestablish that relationship, to reestablish that trust and that love. It's very important. Romans 12:18, this kind of talks to boundaries as well. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So yes, living in love, the goal is to be at peace with everyone. But there's a condition placed on there. As far as it depends on you, you're to do your part, but you cannot. You're not responsible for the other person, right? So that's where the boundary is, understanding where your responsibility ends and where and what you're responsible for. All right, so then the next one. Yeah. Okay. Put on the armor of God. I'm not going to read the whole passage. I think I put it in there. But one important part about the armor of God is that we have to put all of the pieces on in order to be protected. If you go out into the army field and you've got most of the pieces, but you don't have your helmet, then your head's not protected, right? Or if you don't have your shield, then your body's not protected. You have to have all the pieces. So there's the belt of truth that holds everything together. There's a breastplate of righteousness, which protects our hearts and our vital organs. There's the shield of faith. It's our defense that extinguishes the enemy's attacks. There's the helmet of salvation, which ensures life and protects vital organs. And there's the sword of the Spirit. So that's God's word, which is our weapon of offense against the enemy. So all of those pieces are important. If you have all of the pieces in place to defend yourself, that's good. But if you don't have the sword of the Spirit, then you can't move forward, right? You can't be on the up. You're only in a defensive position. So we want to make sure we have all the pieces. All right, the next one, and we've talked a lot about this one, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. A couple months ago, I was walking in Valley Village, I think it was, and I was looking at the used books. I like books. And I happened to see this great, big, huge book. It's really thick, and it said, The Power of Positive Thinking. I was like, oh, that would be a good book to read. It's a national bestseller, so I picked it up and I put it in my cart. And then as I was going along, just the verse, Philippians 4:6-8 came to my mind. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And I thought, that sums up the book. I'm not going to buy it. I just read the book. I don't need to do that. That'll save me a whole bunch of time. I was like, and I just, you know what? That's the truth, though. It's if we only thought about those things, what would our lives be like? What would the quality of our thinking be like? It's a big order, but when you think about it, instead of thinking about all the anxiety things, all the fear things, if we turned our thinking only to those things, and those aren't hard things, what's true, okay, I know what's true, what's honorable, what's just, what's pure, what's lovely, what's commendable, what's excellent, anything that's worthy of praise, think about these things, and imagine what will happen. Your mind will be renewed. The next one is understand, what promises of God do we have when we are in the low places of our life? Oftentimes, when I'm going through a difficult circumstance, and many of you have had the same occurrence, there'll be a certain verse that as I'm reading, it just kind of comes alive, right? It's just like I feel like God's speaking it into me. It's the word is the living word, right? So, and then at those times, if I see a verse that really speaks to what I'm going through, or it gives me the encouragement, and I really felt God, we can take those as our promises. God's speaking that into us, so we can just declare those verses. If we're going through a hard time and God's spoken in the verse about that we will never be forsaken or abandoned, well, we can take those in our prayer. We can pray in thanksgiving for what God has said He's going to do. So we can claim those promises. Father, thank you that you will never leave me or forsake you. Remember, we are to come to God. Do not be worried or anxious about anything, but come to God with thanksgiving. This is how we can come to God with thanksgiving. Thank Him for the promises that He has told us, because we trust God and that they are true. So the claiming those promises that God has given us is another powerful tool. And you can ask for promises when you're in that low place. So sometimes wisdom is needed too. when you're going through a really difficult time, and when I had that emotional breakdown that I had, it's as if God took me into a recovery room and He separated me and He said, just come, rest with me. And I went through this period of time, and He would wake me up every morning at 5 o'clock. I'd wake up, and I would go, and I would spend time just in this kind of recovery room. And I had to recognize that God was A-okay with that, because I couldn't take anything else on. I couldn't do anything else for anyone else at that moment, because I was in the recovery room in my emotions and whatnot. When you have a surgery, you can't go out and serve others, right? Because you're in that place of recovery. It's a time frame. It's not a forever. While you're recovering, while you're restoring, while God is raising you back up, and then once you have healed, like if you're healing for your heart or whatever, then there will come a time. Okay, now it's time to go back. You don't need to stay in here, and you don't want to stay there because then you'll be crippling yourself, right? So there's a time frame of healing that happens, and just rest in God in that time frame. And then when the time comes to start re-emerging back, then you need to go out, because then you're just delaying your own progress. So just a thought there. The next one is to understand the purpose of trials. 1 Peter 4:12-16 says, Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when His glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and God rests on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or thief or any other kind of criminal, or even as a meddler. However, if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. So being a Christian does not exclude us from having trouble, but it does give us access to God's peace, and it does guarantee us that we will not walk alone through those trials. Being insulted because of Jesus is actually proof that Jesus is evident in your life, and so it's a blessing. But we have to make sure that the hardships are coming because of the right reasons, right? They're not. Sin will still create negative consequences in our lives that have nothing to do with our walk of faith. So you just have to. If you're being persecuted because of your faith in Jesus, God, that's a blessed. We're being blessed. We're being recognized as God in our lives. But if we're going out and sinning and we're having negative consequences, well, that doesn't have to do with our walk with God. It has to do with our own doing. James 1:2-4 says, Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So trials help to strengthen and mature us, and they refine the junk in our lives and purify our hearts. So storms will always come, and we're learning how to navigate the waters. So don't be discouraged as you grow in faith and trust. The ride becomes smoother. All right. The next one is to rest in Christ and wait on God. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. How hard is this one? Honestly. This is a tricky one. At the best of times. We have to understand that God is all-powerful, and this is demonstrating our trust in God, isn't it? It's those times when we're not trusting God that our stillness can waver. We kind of take back that wheel of our life, don't we, if we're not really trusting God. So the way of the world is to work and then rest. But God's way is to rest and then work. So we rest in Him, and then we follow God's leading, where He's leading us, and obey His promptings. And in this, there's no need for competition, because God has more than enough. He's got a plan for each and every one of us, so we don't need to compete with one another. He's got enough for us to do. There is no need to compete. And He has unlimited resources. I know for myself, this one was actually kind of a big one because I felt like there was lack, right? I felt like there wouldn't, I don't know what it was. It was just my own insecurities. I felt like sometimes you had to compete because there was, I guess I was just fixated on that there's limited resources until I had that realization that God has unlimited resources. We don't have to compete with one another because He has enough for me to do what I'm doing. He has enough for everyone to do what He has planned for them. So there is no need to compete. And understanding that we cannot fail at what God prompts us to do, because if He is in it, it will be accomplished. Merely obeying is success. It may just be a seed planted for later, but and then finally, operate in love. So we had talked earlier about the different types of control. So there's domination, which values winning, manipulation that values being accepted, and intimidation that values being right. So how can we go about our lives interacting, and how can this be changed? So domination is changed by love. And through that new love, in your book I have the full chart. It's got some examples and whatnot that you can look up if you want. And so Saul, he was concerned with winning. He was changed by love. He was changed by God's love, and now he was concerned with finishing the new value that comes. For manipulation, most valuable is being accepted, and they're changed by truth. Have someone ever tried to manipulate you, and you've just in love spoken truth? Well, that kind of takes away the power of manipulation, right? Once the truth is revealed, and so the new value is being faithful. Intimidation, being right, and humility is what will change that, and the new value of being godly. That came out of the book that I referenced earlier, Conquering the Game of Control, and the whole book goes about explaining that. So if that's of interest, I have a copy anyway. And all right, so how does this tie into the love cycle? So Philippians 2 and 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. This was a huge verse for me. Like I was saying before, when I was operating, I had my faulty operating, that I couldn't understand this. I was like, well, if I don't try to advance, if I don't try to pursue my own gain, then no one's going to give it to me, sort of thing, right? But God really took this verse and hammered this one right into my do nothing, Tracy, out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. And for about a year, that was all he said. Nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. But rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. So fear is focused on self, and love is focused on others. Love is the outward actions towards others. And this does not mean that we can have no ambition. It just means it's not for selfish gain, because then you're not operating in love, right? When you're focused on self. So earthly ambition focuses on self, whereas heavenly is focused on God. Earthly ambition is accomplished through your own strength, whereas heavenly is accomplished through God's strength. And earthly ambition can leave you feeling insecure, right? It's like this constant climb, right? That can be gained or lost at any time. But heavenly is secure, because if God gives it, it's yours. So operating in love, we lift others up. Remember we had that fear cycle before? This is the love cycle. So the fear cycle was trying to, be over top of others. The love cycle is being other to uplift and support. Can you imagine, I struggled because I felt like when I first read the Philippians 2 and 3, and I'm just being honest here with you guys. I mean, this kind of paints me as a terrible whatever, but I'm just being honest. This is the learning that has to come, right? Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. I did care for people, but I felt like if I was always doing that, then that would just leave me kind of on the bottom. I was like, God, I already feel like I'm on the bottom. I don't want to go further on the bottom. And that was my driving thing, right? Because I didn't understand how it worked. But what God showed me is that, yes, I am to, in humility, value others above myself. But if there are others operating in love, then they too, right? Then they are going to be in humility valuing others, such as myself, above themselves, right? And that's the love cycle. When we love, we support and lift up. And then others love and support and lift us up. And that is how the love cycle works. That is what God's plan is for us, is to lift people up, to support people. Oh gosh. To support people. And then they will lift you up and support you up. And it's a cycle that helps to raise people up. Whereas the fear cycle is a cycle of trying to, bring people down. So that is the difference. All right. So we have covered a lot of ground. Thank you all for taking this journey with me. I know this has just been the journey that God took me on, and it was so impacting. I just wanted to get that word out there because there is hope. There is freedom available to us, and we don't have to continue being in bondage to fear that is being thrown our way. So I just wanted to kind of summarize what we went over, kind of the key points, and then just do a call to action. Again, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. All right, so the summary here, our takeaway points, is that God has given us access to peace through our inheritance in Christ. That is not a negotiable thing. It's ours. We're welcome to it. And our emotions motivate us to action. So this can be good or it can be bad. Irrational fear is a perceived threat that may or not be real, and it may or may not happen. And it's Satan's nature to lie, steal, and destroy our lives, and that's often done through fear that holds us in bondage. We have a free will. Fear has to do with punishment, recognizing that we have wounds in our heart from past punishments that keep us in bondage. We also have a need for security. This is a God-given need. Fear clings to things that are unreliable, which creates insecurity, such as the fear of man, wealth, the things that you're clinging to, strength of others or yourself. But faith is clinging to God, who is reliable, and that creates security. Insecurity motivates us to try and control our environment, often through manipulation, domination, and intimidation. But the thing is that we cannot win with control because you're always trying to put the others down. And it puts you in that fear cycle. So contentment, that big secret, we talked about contentment, is being fully surrendered and trusting or depending on God for all things. So in surrender, being willing to surrender your secrecy, being willing to surrender your will, being willing to surrender our pride, and being willing to surrender the outcome are some big factors in what we need to surrender. Learning to trust God is done through intimacy with God, by experiencing that closeness with God, by experiencing that love of God. While we're in the process of growing and maturing, we have grace over us. God has grace over us. And that's that covering that God extends over us while we're, kind of figuring everything out. We will make mistakes. We will fall. We will stumble. But God has grace over us. So our fear is driven out by perfect love. First, by knowing God's true nature in our minds, by reading the Word, and then by experiencing God's true nature, and that's when the belief settles into our hearts. So the Holy Spirit is here to help us, and will fill in the gaps for us as we are growing in maturity. So some steps for reclaiming peace is shift our perspectives, cast our cares onto the Lord, learning to guard our hearts, and understanding the different kinds of pain, so that you can be a discerning guard your heart, so that you won't be blocking out the good, even if sometimes that feels painful. So learning the different kinds of pain, being transformed by the renewing of your mind, understanding the purpose of trials and that God is working goodness out of it. Another strategy is to rest in Christ. To start by being in that place of rest. So, I remember, as I said, I am a bit of a doer. That is my nature. And I was so frustrated. I went to God and I was like, God, I don't know what to do. I want to do something. And it's, it's like you spoke to me and you said, Tracy, you have to learn how to be, and then you can do. And I was like, all right. I need to learn how to be. So resting in God and learning how to be in relationship with Him. And once you've done that, then He's going to open up what you need to do for Him, the purpose that He has planned for you. And then also operating in love. So those are all some strategies for reclaiming peace. So I wanted to kind of end this day, just, we want to leave here and take this and kind of move forward in our lives. So there's just a couple questions that I had that I thought maybe we could all think about. So can we surrender just a little bit more each day as we move towards peace and trusting God? Can we open our hearts a little to the idea of trusting God just a little bit more each day? Can we be brave and step out in faith when God is asking us to do something in obedience? Can we loosen the grip on the steering wheel of our lives a little bit and allow God to take the wheel? Can we encourage one another daily? The Bible says we're to encourage daily, and I know I need it daily, and yet often we don't get that encouragement. So can we seek to encourage one another daily? Can we carry one another's burdens, help one another as we're walking this faith journey out? And can we forget about judging others and instead offer them grace while they are growing, understanding that there's a bigger story going on? And can we choose to see that we are all in an unfinished state and we have the patience with one another's flaws while God does His holy work of rebuilding us? So those are the things I hope as we move forward we can step into, and we can take some of these teachings and learn how to surrender just a little bit more and trust just a little bit more. And as we do that, we're going to start losing some of those gray areas in our life that are the areas of anxiety and fear. And that is my hope for us today.